Hey everybody, CVH here, and today we're going to be doing our first draft analysis on the channel for the Elder Scrolls Legends versus Arena. In this video, we're going to be taking an Arena draft, starting from scratch, and trying to construct the best possible deck, as we should be doing in every single Arena run, and I assume you guys are familiar with as well, but really analyzing in depth every single pick that's worth analyzing, and really going over why the card I'm picking is what I'm picking, and any potential other options there are as we go along. I'm always looking for new types of content to do for Legends, and this seemed definitely like a good one, because a lot of the highlights I post here from Arena runs are just that, gameplay highlights, and I don't really focus on the draft too much. If you've caught my streams, I do tend to analyze the picks a little bit more, but we're going to really focus on it for this video, and if you think that maybe drafting is your area of a problem area, for example, in Arena, in solo, or versus, hopefully this video helps you out a little bit. Things to consider: I did a video kind of like this many months ago to accompany an article I wrote for Between the Lanes called CVH's Guide to Mastering the Arena. The draft went over the picks as well. That article is rather helpful, I believe, so I'll be linking that in the description. It talks about the three things I really think about when I'm doing my Arena drafts. The first being the value of the cards, the second being the curve, the Magicka curve that is, and whether or not we can fix or alter the curve with our pick if that's maybe relevant. That's secondary after the value usually. And the third thing is any synergy that already exists in the deck, or combinations of cards that might increase or decrease the value we get from a particular card being chosen. So in this video we'll be doing all of that and really talking about those more in depth with a Scout versus Arena run. So let's get right into it. If you've liked this kind of style of video, feel free to let me know in the comments, by the way. I'll be sure to do more of it if you guys enjoy it. I should also mention that I won't be including any games with this deck in this video. There are a couple of reasons for that. Versus Arena, and Arena in general, a lot of the games tend to be contingent on a lot of variance. There's more variance in Arena than in Constructed. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about a higher prevalence of RNG cards, and I'm not talking about the top deck variance, or the variance that's inherently in card games and inherently in Legends as a result. I'm just talking about the fact that you can't really account for your opponent's decks. In Constructed, we're not really on an even playing field, but when you're at high legend, you assume your opponent has what they need to have in their deck. You can kind of metagame based on that. Some decks are just weaker than other decks in versus Arena, and in solo Arena you're playing against the AI. So that's kind of a given. But in versus Arena, some decks are just weaker than others, and I don't really want to tarnish the video by showing this deck steamroll an opposing weak deck, making it look better than it is, or really lose to a much better deck with like 4 legendaries, I don't know how many we're going to get, and make it look weaker than it is. Basically, I want to judge the draft picks based on... the goal of this isn't to create necessarily the absolute best deck in the Arena, because that's impossible to control. The variance of the picks is there. The goal is to just learn how to draft in general, so we should be just judging ourselves based on how well we think we've drafted in general. If you do want to see this run, I will be probably finishing it on the stream whenever I turn on the stream next, probably tomorrow. So if you follow me in the stream down below in the description for daily Legends streams, you will more than likely get to see that as well. I do stream a lot of Arena runs, but let's just get right into the draft and see how it goes.
Presenting the Scout.
Alright, for starters, we are really excited. And also, if you guys wanted to follow along with something like the Between the Lanes Arena tier list, which is my personal tier list, I recommend that as well. I'm actually going to scoot over so I'm not covering the highest part of the Magicka costs. There we go. Now, Thorn Histmage and Preserver of the Root are definitely higher value than Smuggler's Hall. Smuggler's Hall being a little bit more inconsistent, and it's just not giving you the value for 6 Magicka that these cards are for 5 and 4 respectively. Besides that, we kind of have to take into consideration we're more likely to get a lot of 4s in the draft, so we're thinking about Magicka curve a little bit, but we don't have to really focus on that at the beginning. In the first 10 or 15 picks, it's much more important to focus on the value picks than your Magicka curve, because you can kind of fix your Magicka curve as you go along and see which kinds of cards you've been being offered. For starters, though, we should just take the best card here, and I do believe that is Thorn Histmage by a fair bit. I believe Thorn Histmage is one of the best class-specific cards in the game. A very unique ramp effect. It's a powerful body. It's going to stick to the board. You're getting more for 5 than you're getting for 4 with Preserver. Preserver better later, not amazing on curve. Thorn Histmage, amazing on curve, can get us to any higher drops we get faster. Maybe we can pick more higher cost cards knowing that we have a Preserver of the Root, or excuse me, knowing that we have a Thorn Histmage. And it is a guard later, which is incredibly valuable as well. So Thorn Histmage, fantastic card to see in the first pick. So here we have three less exciting cards than Thornhist Mage and Preserver. Deadly Draugr, a reasonable 1-drop. It can trade, but it's also very fragile. Banderai Bruiser also suffers from fragility. Also, it's kind of a lower payoff, I believe. Deadly Draugr being able to snipe something larger is pretty huge. Banderai Bruiser, when it does not die immediately, it'll often become a 6/2, then die immediately. Treeminder, pretty reasonable as a constructed card, but in Arena we don't really know if we're going to be able to draft a dedicated deck with high enough Magicka cost to really get max value out of the effect. So while Treeminder might be a little enticing, I'm going to take the Deadly Draugr. I do like having a few 1-drops if possible. Like when I say a few, I literally mean just 1 or 2. Because there are games when you don't get the Ring of Magicka, and it is very nice to be able to get on board in the field lane immediately and start trying to contest before your opponent in those cases. So this 1-drop will probably help us out. It might be our only 1-drop in the entire draft, but could serve that good purpose. Elixir of Conflict we can write off here immediately as just being too low of value, as almost all the elixirs are, I believe, unless we have some crazy case of the 3 picks being terrible. Vicious Drake, high power level in certain cases, but not all of our opponents are even going to be having supports in their deck, so a little bit more inconsistent. Little Girl, while it is very fragile, as we've mentioned with the Deadly Draugr and the Banderai Bruiser before, the payoff of this card actually going off is super high, so I do think this card easily has the highest reasonably attainable ceiling of power level. Vicious Drake could obviously snipe a Mundus Stone, but that implies that our opponent drafted a Mundus Stone. Little Girl, in any game it could go off if our opponent doesn't have removal. And, you know, we could just bait out removal with our Deadly Draugrs and other things before that. So I'm going to take the Little Girl here. It also allows us to have that knowledge that we have some Drain in the deck. Drain is incredibly powerful in Arena. If there is a format for Little Girl, it's not constructed. It is more than likely just Arena. So here the highest power level card is Nimble Ally, just amazing body for its cost if it's able to hit. And we're early in the draft, so while we're unfavored currently, that could definitely change. Camel just doesn't trade very well at all. Vicious Brigand, actually a pretty powerful 1-drop, but we already have a 1-drop. I don't want to overload on those. And, you know, it's powerful for a 1-drop, but if you have too many 1-drops, it can seriously impact the quality of cards in your hand. So I'm just going to take the Nimble Ally here. It's our first 3-drop as well, so after value, we take into consideration the curve, and hey, it's filling a role that we don't have filled yet, whereas these do not, and they're weaker than the cards we've already picked. So here we could take a second 3-drop in either the Treeminder or the Giant Bat. I do right away like the Bat more. I think it's more value than Treeminder, so I'm going to write off the Treeminder here. Also, we now consider synergy. We have to always take the Nimble Ally into account in the back of our mind. So Giant Bat over Treeminder is what I would do. Do we want to take the Anzaleel instead of the Giant Bat? Well, Anzaleel is kind of threatening, but it's also relatively fragile. Giant Bat kind of fits a unique role where it can serve as that little bit of removal, or a 2-damage reach from hand, or that 2-damage ping, and it's a little bit more drain for us if we're going to be playing the long game, so I like it. Now this is a much easier pick than we've had so far. We've already been offered these 2 cards, and while they're okay, not very high power level, Stalking Shadow Scale, just incredible value for turn 3, and we're kind of getting a lot of 3s, but we don't have to worry about our curve too much yet, so I'm just going to take the highest value card here, which is the Shadow Scale. Also, the highest value card here is a little bit in question. Enchanted Plate and Skooma Underboss are both pretty clearly better than Imperial Armor, which doesn't really impact attack and doesn't cycle like the Plate. I would say the Plate's a little bit better than the Underboss, but I am a little worried about the curve currently because we have 0 2-drops, and that is a critical thing to not have this early in the draft, so I might just pick this up here. And we're also taking a little bit of synergy into account for the Nimble Ally as well. So I'm going to take the Underboss there, feel a little bit safe with that pick. Then we have Mediocre 2-drop, Mediocre 2-drop, really good 7-drop. Do we want to respect the curve a little too much? We run the risk of getting too many 2-drops and having low card quality. It's nice in Scout to make sure you have a bit of late game, especially if you already have a bit of ramp, because it's not very good if you have nothing to ramp to. So I'm just going to take the highest value card here by a lot, which is Chorus Reaper, get a little bit of that late game. This one is a landslide easy pick. These 2 cards are horrendous in Arena, as you might have seen on the tier list. Just don't really need to explain too much. They don't impact the board. We don't have any 0 costs. Even if we did, we'd have like 2 maybe. It's really bad stuff in Arena. Viper, great. Spot removal. That's basically all I need to say. Things that are targeted removal in Arena are at a premium, so we're going to take that without even a second thought. Ferocious Drag, lower power level than these, pretty obviously. You're paying 1 more Magicka than Shadow Scale for 1 more health, and you're losing the Slay ability, so pretty terrible. We would never take Drag over Shadow Scale in any world. Lurking Mummy is a consideration for a bit though, because it is a very swingy prophecy, and as we can see we don't have any of those yet, but Stalking Shadowscale just represents so much value for turn 3 or turn 2 with the ring. We shouldn't discount the possibility of getting the ring, so we're just going to take the Shadowscale. Worry about prophecies a bit later. We already have something to play on curve on 5, and obviously you'd much rather play Thornhist Mage on 5 than a Lurking Mummy. Here is a little bit of a question. Murkwater Goblin, another horrendous card. We can immediately write that off. It's good to write off a card at the beginning of your pick of 3. Usually that's able to be done, and we can do that and then decide between the other 2 which is more appropriate. Crushing Blow, obviously a very constructed playable card. Good removal, good for that extra bit of damage. Gristlehide Dreg, not great in constructed, but could be pretty good in arena. It's not very easily removed by a lot of the cards. You're going to see a lot of in constructed. And it can cycle you, and if you run out of cards in arena, that can be a pretty big problem. There aren't really consistent ways to draw cards. This could function as that way. So between Crushing Blow and Gristlehide Dreg, a lot of it has to come down to curve, I think, a little bit, because we do already have a lot to do on turn 3. Crushing Blow obviously fine later, but I wouldn't mind another solid 5-drop. This is definitely a questionable pick. I think Crushing Blow is probably the better card. I don't know if that's really up for debate. It's definitely more versatile, but I might just take the Gristlehide so I have one more thing to do on 5. You know what? Can't pass the versatility of the Crushing Blow. I do think it's just slightly better value. Elder Centaur, it's okay for an aggressive strategy. We already have an on-curve 5 though, and the other 2 options are on-curve 6 drops, so I'm more inclined to want to take those. Illusory Mimic, not usually great in arena, just straight up value-wise. Night Predator, not great either, but it does have one more additional health point, which can be a pretty big difference, and the Regenerate can make it kind of hard to deal with. But Mimic in this deck is actually rather intriguing, because we already have this guard, we already have this charge lethal, that would be amazing. We already have Giant Bat with charge and drain, we already have Deadly Draugr with even lethal. Some of these cards, like the Viper and the Bat and the Hist Mage, are cards you would see in a constructed Mimic Scout deck. So I think given what we already have so far, thinking about some synergy in the deck after we already thought about the value and the curve, Mimic seems like the correct pick for the way the deck looks so far. I'm not going to overly emphasize keywords over other cards from here on out. Not overly emphasizing the synergy, but it will be something to continue to think about in the back of my mind. So first thing to think about here is, since the cards are relatively even value, relatively, give or take a little bit, we should think about the curve, and as you can see, we're way heavier on 3s than 2s, and 2s are much more critical as well, so we should probably get a 2-drop here. The real question, since this card's effect is much worse than this card's effect, but this card has better stats than this card, since those kind of trade off there, do we want the green card for the Nimble Ally? And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 12 so far. Do we want to stay favored that much for the Nimble Ally? Second Scamander Boss is really not doing a whole lot for this deck, but I do think it's probably worth it to keep playing in green and getting that Nimble Ally as consistently as possible. And the 2-3 over the 2-2 can be pretty critical there. So first thing to think about is value. Brotherhood Sanctuary, terrible card in arena. Drafted it once, do not recommend it. Deshaun Avenger, really powerful 4. Blackworm Necromancer, really powerful 6. We're a little bit lacking on curve 4s, as you can see. We're not super lacking on 6s. We want to have less 6s than 4s. But what's the difference in power level, really? Odds are, when you resolve a Blackworm Necromancer in arena, it can just straight up end the game. We have some pretty powerful cards to bring back as well, so I'm going to take the Necromancer just for power level here. I think it's that much better than Deshaun, although I wouldn't mind seeing some more Deshauns in the future. Here we have another Crushing Blow, obviously fine. Murkwater Butcher could be another 1-drop, but we already have one. Don't really feel the need to take a bad 3-drop, and the highest power level card here is between Crushing Blow and Sanctuary Pet. We already have a Crushing Blow. We're trying to worry about the Nimble Ally a bit, as well as the Illusory Mimic a bit. This card's effect is incredibly unique, one of the more powerful cards from the Dark Brotherhood expansion, so I'm going to take the Sanctuary Pet here based on power level. Okay, so highest power level here. They're all good cards, definitely all good cards. Shadow Shift is very unique, and we have a few things with lethal already that could be very powerful along with the Shadow Shift. It's nice to have one of those in your deck, and Stone Tooth Scrapper can shore up our 4-drops a bit, but I think that's probably more likely to happen later than seeing another Shadow Shift. Very good card in arena with all these lethals especially. Don't really want another 3. You'll see me probably pass up some decent 3s. We're getting halfway through the draft now, so value is important, but it's also important to think about curve. So unless we get a crazy 3-drop like Young Mammoth, we're probably going to be passing up the majority of 3s we get offered. As we see here, we're getting offered Tree Minder. Not only is it a 3-drop, but it's also a 3-drop we don't really want too much. Maple Shield, just horrible card in arena for obvious reasons. Shadow Shift number 2, I don't mind it. It's a pretty good effect to have access to. Here, highest value card. Obviously not Goblin Skulk, so if we were going to take that, it would be just a curve consideration, which we are kind of weak on 2 still. That's very worrying. But between, I mean, we could actually consider taking the Skulk here just because we're that weak on 2s, but that is quite a lot worse than Green Pact Stalker. Green Pact Stalker giving us a 4, which is more important than a 3 here. It's another green card, it's a guard for the Illusory Mimic, and the effect procs kind of consistently in Constructed, in Arena. More so than, well, not more so than in Constructed, but more so than you'd expect, not in Constructed with all these pings. So I will take the Green Pact Stalker here, just worry about the 4-drop slot. Like I mentioned, stalking Shadow Scale is incredible on 3. Swamp Leviathan is incredible on 7 as well, and we do have Thorn-Hissed Mage to ramp into it. I believe Swamp Leviathan is probably the best card here, and it's unlikely we get offered much more late game, so that could really give us the end game push we're looking for. The question is, how worried are we about 2s? I would definitely like to finish the draft with somewhere between 5 and 7 2-drops, preferably 6 or 7. 5 could be acceptable sometimes if we have the 1-drop, which we do. But Stormhold Henchman is just not as good of a 2-drop as Swamp Leviathan is a 7. So here we're going to take the risky pick. We're going to take the Swamp Leviathan, and this kind of forces us, since we're taking this pick, to really take about all the 2s we get offered from here on out. Not offered a 2 here. Ferocious Strike, as mentioned, is horrible. Between these 2 cards, they're both fantastic in Arena, but Dark Guardian is slightly better, and it's more defensive, so if we do miss our 2-drop, we get kind of a payoff with Dark Guardian and can maybe take back the board with that card. So that's going to be the pick there. Unfortunately, even though Faroon Defender is only the 2nd best card here behind the Shadow Scale, I would say it will be the pick. It's not horrible, it's just not great, but it is a 2-drop and a Prophecy and defensive, so it can sort of give us that the 2-drop we've been lacking there. This pick, I do believe Enchanted Plate is the best card. If we had any way whatsoever to buff the Old Gate Warden, we could at least try to consider it, but as it is, the value of the card is just super low, so the value of Enchanted Plate is going to make it the pick, even though Arrow in the Knee can have some neat synergy with maybe Green Pact Stalker or something. 2-drop, Prophecy, highest value card here by far. Also, the second thing to consider is the curve, and we need it the most by far. Synergy, we can also consider it does have some positive synergy with the Nimble Ally, so this is kind of the perfect card to see here. Ooh, we get a legendary, guys. This is pretty exciting. Necron Mastermind we can write off immediately. I don't even think we actually have a last gasp. Either way, the power level is generally fairly low in Arena. Bone Colossus and Tazcat are both amazing cards. So what do we have to think about now? A little bit in the curve is first after value. If we assume these have relatively similar power levels, which is, I think, mostly true, they can both completely just end the game in Arena. Thinking about the curve next, we do have 2 7-drops already in Chorus Reaper and Swamp Leviathan, and we have 0 9-drops. I'm actually going to move over here so I can hover over the cards and show you what they all do. Usually covering that part when I'm streaming. But yeah, 2 7-drops and 0 things more than that. We also consider a couple synergies we have in the deck. The Nimble Ally, it's green for that. We have Illusory Mimic, which you don't normally see in Arena at all, and it is another charge, which is critical. Definitely the best keyword to get off the Mimic in Arena. So we will just be taking the Tazcat. It fixes the curve, it helps with our synergy cards, and it's a very unique game-ending threat that our opponents are probably not going to be able to play around with any consistency. Here, we're looking for highest value is Skooma Underboss. What do we need the most in the curve? It's Skooma Underboss. Okay, Skooma Underboss is going to be the take. Mediocre Khajiits is the theme of our 2-cost section. But that does give us, well, it says 6 2-drops, but realistically it's only 5, because one of them is an Enchanted Plate, and we can't really count Enchanted Plate as an on-curve 2-drop play. So this is the tricky pick. Obviously, Dune Smuggler is better than Goblin Skulk, and you could make the argument that even Plead of Kinnereth is better than Goblin Skulk in a deck that doesn't have any 0-cost cards. Will we get a 0-cost card in the last 4 picks? More than likely not. More than likely not the one that we want to take. That said, we are so weak on turn 2 plays that I do believe, and so strong on turn 3 plays. Obviously, it's not like we don't have many 2s or 3s, and then we could just say, Dune Smuggler can fix the curve as well. We just really don't need the Dune Smuggler at all, even though it does have some really good implications with Shadow Shift. Would I be comfortable with 1 more 2-drop? Because we could probably get offered 1 more in the next 4 cards. If I had 1 less 2-drop, I would take the Skulk here. But I think with 5 so far and 4 picks to go, I'm gonna take the risky bet here that we're gonna get offered at least 1 more playable 2-drop. I'm going to take the Dune Smuggler here. I think that's reasonable. So, highest power level here, Preserver of the Root. Giant Snake coming in close, Swindler just terrible. What fixes the curve? Well, we don't have much to do on turns 4 or turn 5. Turn 5 is a little weaker than turn 4, but turn 4 is more important because it's earlier, so we want to make sure we don't miss a turn early if at all possible. And Preserver also is another late game card. It can be played whenever. Snake is really powerful and unique as well, but I think Preserver is going to be the most consistently good card here, so I'm going to take the Preserver of the root. Don't mind seeing another one of those after we passed one up earlier. Highest power level here is U-Shield, too situational as mentioned earlier, way too situational, although it does have neat implications with Dune Smuggler and buffing a whole bunch of stuff. But U-Shield, pretty neat little battle trick, I guess you can call it. Your opponent's going to be flooding the lane, you can just buff a thing by +4/+4 and give it guard for 2. I like this card quite a bit, so we're going to take the U-Shield there. Unfortunately, not a 2-drop, although we do have one more pick after this that we could get a 2-drop, that would be nice. I do think our late game is pretty much complete, I would say, with 2 7s, a 9, a couple 6s. I think that's about all we'll need, so I don't want to bog down my hand with this Swamp Leviathan. Shadow Scale, probably the best card. One of these is the best card here, that's pretty clear. However, I do think we just need the Guardian. Even though it's not a 2-drop, it can trade up with a 2-drop kind of consistently if they play a 3-2 or a 2-2. 2-3s are this card's worst nightmare, but we even have some ways to buff it now with the U-Shield and the Enchanted Plate. It could be reasonable to go this card into a U-Shield or a Plate sometimes, so we're just going to take the Mournhold Guardian just for a curve consideration. Also helps the Nimble Ally and somewhat the Illusory Mimic as well. Last card, unfortunately, is also not a 2-drop. Consistently good card is going to be Dune Smuggler here. Things to consider: do we have a lot of big things that we could kill our opponent with Swift Strike? We have a couple. Not as many as I think I would need to take Swift Strike. And this card could be good with a few of our threats, but we also do have a little bit of Drain already in the deck thanks to the Giant Bat, the Little Girl sometimes, and even the Illusory Mimic sometimes. So I'm not going to think we need the Snake Tooth Necklace too much. We also already have a couple items in the deck, so it's a little bit more inconsistent. To bog down your deck with things that you can't always even play. Dune Smuggler, with the double Shadow Shift and the Dune Smuggler, things could get out of hand. Our opponent won't really know what lane they could play around things in, and we'll be buffing things with the Dune Smugglers, hopefully. So I do like that. It can help our Slay cards, it can help our lethal cards, it can even move a problematic guard into our opponent's way if we're trying to take back a lost board. So yeah, 2 Dune Smugglers, and that's going to do it for this deck. I think that's pretty solid scout deck. I have no real problems with it. We have some really standout cards. As soon as it lets me, I'm going to show some of the highlights, I think. 2 Shadow Shift, definitely very powerful. Our 2-drops are definitely weak. That is the problem part of the deck, but we have some plays, right? We have Daring Cutpurse and 3 Skooma Underbosses with 2 1-drops. So if I were playing this deck in Arena, which I will be probably shipping everything that's not a 1-drop or a 2-drop creature that I can play, unless I already have one, and then I can maybe keep a 3 or a 4 along with it if they're good enough and I have the Ring of Magicka, or even if I don't sometimes. If I have 1, 2, 3, I'm keeping it all, obviously. If I have 1, 2, 4, I might be keeping it all, depending on what the 4-drop is. So aggressively mulliganing to make sure we don't miss our turn 2, because that's probably how this deck is going to find at least one loss in the run somewhere. Other standouts, the 2 Dune Smugglers with the 2 Shadow Shift, that worked out. Nimble Ally, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I wish it had a counter down there. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, I believe. So slightly favored for the Ally, that's good. Definitely a standout is the 2 Stalking Shadow Scales, one of the best 3-drops. Preserver's great. Hist Mage, Blackworm Necromancer, the Mimic in this deck could actually be very powerful. Don't want to rely on it, but it could be very powerful. And obviously the late game of Swamp Leviathan and Tazcad can't really be beat too often in Arena. So I'm excited to play the deck. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this look into my drafting process. As always, if you did, feel free to leave a like. Subscribe to the channel for more strategy videos, gameplay videos, all the good stuff for Elder Scrolls Legends. Check out my stream like I mentioned in the description. I'll see you guys next time.